Chapter 29 of Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm by Kate Douglas WIGGIN. Chapter 29 Mother and Daughter. 2 months had gone by. 2 months of steady fagging work. Of cooking, washing, ironing. Of mending and caring for the 3 children. Although Jenny was fast becoming a notable little housewife, quick, ready, and capable. There were months in which there had been many a weary night of watching by Aurelia's bedside, of soothing and bandaging and rubbing, of reading and nursing, even of feeding and bathing. The ceaseless care was growing less now, and the family breathed more freely, for the mother's sigh of pain no longer came from the stifling bedroom, where, during a hot and humid August, Aurelia had lain, suffering with every breath she drew. There would be no question of walking for many a month to come, but blessings seemed to multiply when the blinds could be opened and the bed drawn near the window, when Mother, with pillows behind her, could at least sit and watch the work going on, could smile at the past agony and forget the weary hours that had led to her present comparative ease and comfort. No girl of 17 can pass through such an ordeal and come out unchanged. No girl of Rebecca's temperament could go through it without some inward repining and rebellion. She was doing tasks in which she could not be fully happy, heavy and trying tasks, which perhaps she could never do with complete success or satisfaction, and like promise of nectar to thirsty lips was the vision of joys she had had to put aside for the performance of dull daily duty. How brief, how fleeting had been those splendid visions when the universe seemed open for her young strength to battle and triumph in. How soon they had faded into the light of common day. At first, sympathy and grief were so keen she thought of nothing but her mother's pain. No consciousness of self interposed between her and her filial service. Then, as the weeks passed, little blighted hopes began to stir and ache in her breast. Defeated ambitions raised their heads as if to sting her. Unattainable delights teased her by their very nearness, by the narrow line of separation that lay between her and their realization. It is easy for the moment to tread the narrow way, looking neither to the right nor left, upborne by the sense of right doing. But that first joy of self-denial, the joy that is like fire in the blood, dies away. The path seems drearier, and the footsteps falter. Such a time came to Rebecca, and her bright spirit flagged when the letter was received saying that her position in Augusta had been filled. There was a mutinous leap of the heart then, a beating of wings against the door of the cage, a longing for the freedom of the big world outside. It was the stirring of the powers within her, though she called it by no such grand name. She felt as if the wind of destiny were blowing her flame hither and thither, burning, consuming her, but kindling nothing. All this meant one stormy night in her little room at Sunnybrook, but the clouds blew over, the sun shone again, a rainbow stretched across the sky, while hope clad in April green smiled into her upturned face and beckoned her on, saying,
"Grow old along with me, the best is yet to be."
Threads of joy ran in and out of the grey tangled web of daily living. There was the attempt at odd moments to make the bare little house less bare by bringing in out of doors, taking a leaf from nature's book and noting how she conceals ugliness wherever she finds it. Then there was the satisfaction of being mistress of the poor domain, of planning, governing, deciding, of bringing order out of chaos, of implanting gaiety in the place of inert resignation to the inevitable. Another element of comfort was the children's love, for they turned to her as flowers to the sun, drawing confidently on her fund of stories, serene in the conviction that there was no limit to Rebecca's power of make-believe. In this, and in yet greater things, little as she realized it, the law of compensation was working in her behalf, for in those anxious days mother and daughter found and knew each other as never before. A new sense was born in Rebecca as she hung over her mother's bed of pain and unrest, a sense that comes only of ministering, a sense that grows only when the strong bend toward the weak. As for Aurelia, words could never have expressed her dumb happiness when the real revelation of motherhood was vouchsafed her. In all the earlier years, when her babies were young, carking cares and anxieties darkened the fireside with their brooding wings. Then Rebecca had gone away, and in the long months of absence, her mind and soul had grown out of her mother's knowledge, so that now, when Aurelia had time and strength to study her child, she was like some enchanting changeling. Aurelia and Hannah had gone on in the dull round and the common task, growing duller and duller. But now, on a certain stage of life's journey, who should appear but this bewildering being, who gave wings to thoughts that had only crept before, who brought color and grace and harmony into the dun brown texture of existence. You might harness Rebecca to the heaviest plow, and while she had youth on her side, she would always remember the green earth under her feet and the blue sky over her head. Her physical eyes saw the cake she was stirring and the loaf she was kneading. Her physical ear heard the kitchen fire crackling and the tea kettle singing. But ever and anon her fancy mounted on pinions, rested itself, renewed its strength in the upper air. The bare little farmhouse was a fixed fact, but she had many a palace into which she now and then withdrew, palaces peopled with stirring and gallant figures belonging to the world of romance, palaces not without their heavenly apparitions too, breathing celestial counsel. Every time she retired to her citadel of dreams, she came forth radiant and refreshed, as one who has seen the evening star, or heard sweet music, or smelled the rose of joy. Aurelia could have understood the feeling of a narrow-minded and conventional hen who has brought a strange, intrepid duckling into the world. But her situation was still more wonderful, for she could only compare her sensations to those of some quiet brown Dorking who has brooded an ordinary egg and hatched a bird of paradise. Such an idea had crossed her mind more than once during the past fortnight, and it flashed to and fro this mellow October morning when Rebecca came into the room with her arms full of goldenrod and flaming autumn leaves.
"Just a hint of the fall styles, Mother,"
she said, slipping the stem of a gorgeous red and yellow sapling between the mattress and the foot of the bed.
"This was leaning over the pool, and I was afraid it would be vain if I left it there too long looking at its beautiful reflection, so I took it away from danger. Isn't it wonderful? How I wish I could carry one to poor Aunt Miranda today. There's never a flower in the brick house when I'm away."
It was a marvelous morning. The sun had climbed into a world that held in remembrance only a succession of golden days and starlit nights. The air was fragrant with ripening fruit, and there was a mad little bird on the tree outside the door, nearly bursting his throat with joy of living. He had forgotten that summer was over, that winter must ever come, and who could think of cold winds, bare boughs, or frozen streams on such a day? A painted moth came in at the open window and settled on the tuft of brilliant leaves. Aurelia heard the bird and looked from the beauty of the glowing bush to her tall, splendid daughter, standing like young spring with golden autumn in her arms. Then suddenly she covered her eyes and cried,
"I can't bear it! Here I lie chained to this bed, interfering with everything you want to do. It's all wasted. All my saving and doing without, all your hard study, all Mirandy's outlay. Everything that we thought was going to be the making of you."
Mother, don't talk so, don't think so,"
exclaimed Rebecca, sitting down impetuously on the floor by the bed and dropping the goldenrod by her side.
Why, Mother, I'm only a little past 17. This person in a purple calico apron with flower in her nose is only the beginnings of me. Do you remember the young tree that John transplanted? We had a dry summer and a cold winter, and it didn't grow a bit, nor show anything of all we did for it. Then there was a good year, and it made up for lost time. This is just my little rooting season, Mother, but don't go and believe my day is over, because it hasn't begun. The old maple by the well that's in its 100th year and had new leaves this summer, so there must be hope for me at 17.
You can put a brave face on it,
sobbed Aurelia.
But you can't deceive me. You've lost your place. You'll never see your friends here, and you're nothing but a drudge.
I look like a drudge,
said Rebecca mysteriously, with laughing eyes.
But I really am a princess. You mustn't tell, but this is only a disguise. I wear it for reasons of state. The king and queen who are at present occupying my throne are very old and tottering, and are going to abdicate shortly in my favor. It's rather a small kingdom, I suppose, as kingdoms go, so there isn't much struggle for it in royal circles, and you mustn't expect to see a golden throne set with jewels. It'll probably be only of ivory, with a nice screen of peacock feathers for a background, but you shall have a comfortable chair very near it, with quantities of slaves to do what they call in novels your lightest bidding.
Aurelia smiled in spite of herself, and though not perhaps wholly deceived, she was comforted.
I only hope you won't have to wait too long for your thrones and your kingdoms, Rebecca,
she said,
and that I shall have a sight of them before I die. But life looks very hard and rough to me, what with your Aunt Miranda a cripple at the brick house, me another here at the farm, you tied hand and foot, first with one and then with the other, to say nothing of Jenny and Fanny and Mark. You've got something of your father's happy disposition, or it would weigh on you as it does on me.
Why, Mother!
cried Rebecca, clasping her knees with her hands.
Why, Mother, it's enough joy just to be here in the world on a day like this, to have the chance of seeing, feeling, doing, becoming. When you were 17, Mother, wasn't it good just to be alive? You haven't forgotten.
No,
said Aurelia.
But I wasn't so much alive as you are, never in the world.
I often think,
Rebecca continued, walking to the window and looking out at the trees.
I often think how dreadful it would be if I were not here at all. If Hannah had come, and then, instead of me, John and Jenny and Fanny and the others, but no Rebecca, never any Rebecca. To be alive makes up for everything. There ought to be fears in my heart, but there aren't. Something stronger sweeps them out, something like a wind. Oh, see, there is Will driving up the lane, Mother, and he ought to have a letter from the brick house.
End of chapter 29. Chapter 30 of Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm by Kate Douglas WIGGIN. Chapter 30. Goodbye, Sunnybrook. Will Melville drove up to the window and, tossing a letter into Rebecca's lap, went off to the barn on an errand.
Sister's no worse, then,
sighed Aurelia gratefully.
Or Jane would have telegraphed. See what she says.
Rebecca opened the envelope and read in one flash of an eye the whole brief page.
Your Aunt Miranda passed away an hour ago. Come at once, if your mother is out of danger. I shall not have the funeral till you are here. She died very suddenly and without any pain. Oh, Rebecca, I long for you so. Aunt Jane.
The force of habit was too strong, and even in the hour of death, Jane had remembered that a telegram was 25 cents, and that Aurelia would have to pay $50 for its delivery. Rebecca burst into a passion of tears as she cried,
Poor Aunt Miranda! She is gone without taking a bit of comfort in life, and I couldn't say goodbye to her. Poor lonely Aunt Jane! What can I do, Mother? I feel torn in two between you and the brick house.
You must go this very instant,
said Aurelia, starting from her pillows.
If I was to die while you were away, I would say the very same thing. Your aunts have done everything in the world for you, more than I've ever been able to do, and it is your turn to pay back some of their kindness and show your gratitude. The doctor says I've turned the corner, and I feel that I have. Jenny can make out somehow if Hannah'll come over once a day.
But, Mother, I can't go. Who'll turn you in bed?
Exclaimed Rebecca, walking the floor and wringing her hands distractedly.
It don't make any difference if I don't get turned,
replied Aurelia stoically.
If a woman of my age and the mother of a family hasn't got sense enough not to slip off haymows, she'd ought to suffer. Go put on your black dress and pack your bag. I'd give a good deal if I was able to go to my sister's funeral and prove that I've forgotten and forgiven all she said when I was married. Her acts were softer than her words, Mirandy's were, and she's made up to you for all she ever sinned against me and your father. And, oh, Rebecca,
she continued, with a quivering voice,
I remember so well when we were little girls together, and she took such pride in curling my hair. And another time when we were grown up, she lent me her best blue muslin. It was when your father had asked me to lead the grand march with him at the Christmas dance, and I found out afterwards she thought he'd intended to ask her.
Here Aurelia broke down and wept bitterly, for the recollection of the past had softened her heart and brought the comforting tears even more effectually than the news of her sister's death. There was only an hour for preparation. Will would drive Rebecca to Temperance and send Jenny back from school. He volunteered also to engage a woman to sleep at the farm in case Mrs. Randall should be worse at any time in the night. Rebecca flew down over the hill to get a last pail of spring water, and as she lifted the bucket from the crystal depths and looked out over the glowing beauty of the autumn landscape, she saw a company of surveyors with their instruments making calculations and laying lines that apparently crossed Sunnybrook at the favorite spot where Mirror Pool lay clear and placid, the yellow leaves on its surface no yellower than its sparkling sands. She caught her breath.
The time has come,
she thought.
I'm saying goodbye to Sunnybrook, and the golden gates that almost swung together that last day in Wareham will close forever now. Goodbye, dear brook and hills and meadows. You're going to see life too, so we must be hopeful and say to one another, grow old along with me, the best is yet to be.
Will Melville had seen the surveyors too, and had heard in the Temperance post office that morning the probable sum that Mrs. Randall would receive from the railway company. He was in good spirits at his own improved prospects, for his farm was so placed that its value could only be increased by the new road. He was also relieved in mind that his wife's family would no longer be in dire poverty directly at his doorstep, so to speak. John could now be hurried forward and forced into the position of head of the family several years sooner than had been anticipated. So Hannah's husband was obliged to exercise great self-control, or he would have whistled while he was driving Rebecca to the Temperance station. He could not understand her sad face or the tears that rolled silently down her cheeks from time to time, for Hannah had always represented her Aunt Miranda as an irascible, parsimonious old woman, who would be no loss to the world whenever she should elect to disappear from it.
"Cheer up, Becky,"
he said as he left her at the depot.
"You'll find your mother sitting up when you come back, and the next thing you know, the whole family will be moving to some nice little house wherever your work is. Things will never be so bad again as they have been this last year. That's what Hannah and I think."
And he drove away to tell his wife the news. Adam Ladd was in the station and came up to Rebecca instantly as she entered the door looking very unlike her bright self.
"The princess is sad this morning,"
he said, taking her hand.
"Aladdin must rub the magic lamp. Then the slave will appear, and these tears be dried in a trice."
He spoke lightly, for he thought her trouble was something connected with the affairs at Sunnybrook, and that he could soon bring the smiles by telling her that the farm was sold and that her mother was to receive a handsome price in return. He meant to remind her, too, that though she must leave the home of her youth, it was too remote a place to be a proper dwelling either for herself or for her lonely mother and the 3 younger children. He could hear her say, as plainly as if it were yesterday,
I don't think one ever forgets the spot where one lived as a child.
He could see the quaint little figure sitting on the piazza at North Riverboro, and watch it disappear into the lilac bushes when he gave the memorable order for 300 cakes of rose red and snow white soap. A word or two soon told him that her grief was of another sort, and her mood was so absent, so sensitive and tearful, that he could only assure her of his sympathy and beg that he might come soon to the brick house to see with his own eyes how she was faring. Adam thought, when he had put her on the train and taken his leave, that Rebecca was, in her sad dignity and gravity, more beautiful than he had ever seen her, all beautiful and all womanly. But in that moment's speech with her, he had looked into her eyes, and they were still those of a child. There was no knowledge of the world in their shining depths, no experience of men or women, no passion or comprehension of it. He turned from the little country station to walk in the woods by the wayside until his own train should be leaving, and from time to time he threw himself under a tree to think and dream and look at the glory of the foliage. He had brought a new copy of the Arabian Nights for Rebecca, wishing to replace the well-worn old one that had been the delight of her girlhood. But meeting her at such an inauspicious time, he had absently carried it away with him. He turned the pages idly until he came to the story of Aladdin and the wonderful lamp, and presently, in spite of his 34 years, the old tale held him spellbound, as it did in the days when he first read it as a boy. But there were certain paragraphs that especially caught his eye and arrested his attention, paragraphs that he read and reread, finding in them he knew not what secret delight and significance. These were the quaintly turned phrases describing the effect on the once poor Aladdin of his wonderful riches, and those descanting upon the beauty and charm of the Sultan's daughter, the Princess Badroulbadour.
Not only those who knew Aladdin when he played in the streets like a vagabond did not know him again. Those who had seen him but a little while before hardly knew him, so much were his features altered. Such were the effects of the lamp as to procure by degrees to those who possessed it perfections agreeable to the rank the right use of it advanced them to. The princess was the most beautiful brunette in the world. Her eyes were large, lively, and sparkling. Her looks sweet and modest. Her nose was of a just proportion and without a fault. Her mouth small, her lips of a vermilion red, and charmingly agreeable symmetry. In a word, all the features of her face were perfectly regular. It is not therefore surprising that Aladdin, who had never seen, and was a stranger to, so many charms, was dazzled. With all these perfections the princess had so delicate a shape, so majestic an air, that the sight of her was sufficient to inspire respect. "Adorable princess," said Aladdin to her, accosting her and saluting her respectfully, "if I have the misfortune to have displeased you by my boldness in aspiring to the possession of so lovely a creature, I must tell you that you ought to blame your bright eyes and charms, not me." "Prince," answered the princess, "it is enough for me to have seen you, to tell you that I obey without reluctance."
End of chapter 30. Chapter 31 of Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm by Kate Douglas Wiggin. Chapter 31. Aunt Miranda's Apology. When Rebecca alighted from the train at Maplewood and hurried to the post office where the stage was standing, what was her joy to see Uncle Jerry Cobb holding the horses' heads.
"The regular driver's sick,"
he explained.
"And when they sent for me, thinks I to myself, my driving days is over. But Rebecky won't let the grass grow under her feet when she gets her Aunt Jane's letter, and like as not I'll catch her today. Or she gets delayed tomorrow for certain. So here I be just as I was more'n 6 year ago. Will you be a real lady passenger, or will ye sit up in front with me?"
Emotions of various sorts were all struggling together in the old man's face, and the 2 or 3 bystanders were astounded when they saw the handsome, stately girl fling herself onto Mr. Cobb's dusty shoulder, crying like a child.
Oh, Uncle Jerry!
she sobbed.
Dear Uncle Jerry, it's all so long ago and so much has happened and we've grown so old and so much is going to happen that I'm fairly frightened.
There, lovey.
The old man whispered comfortingly.
We'll be all alone on the stage, and we'll talk things over as we go along the road, and maybe they won't look so bad.
Every mile of the way was as familiar to Rebecca as to Uncle Jerry. Every watering trough, grindstone, red barn, weather vane, duck pond, and sandy brook. And all the time she was looking backward to the day, seemingly so long ago, when she sat on the box seat for the first time, her legs dangling in the air, too short to reach the footboard. She could smell the big bouquet of lilacs, see the pink-flounced parasol, feel the stiffness of the starched buff calico and the hated prick of the black and yellow porcupine quills. The drive was taken almost in silence, but it was a sweet, comforting silence, both to Uncle Jerry and the girl. Then came the sight of Abijah Flagg shelling beans in the barn, and then the Perkins attic windows with the white cloth fluttering from them. She could spell Emma Jane's loving thought and welcome in that little waving flag. A word and a message sent to her just at the first moment when Riverboro chimneys rose into view. Something to warm her heart till they could meet. The brick house came next, looking just as of yore, though it seemed to Rebecca as if death should have cast some mysterious spell over it. There were the rolling meadows, the stately elms, all yellow and brown now, the glowing maples, the garden beds bright with asters, and the hollyhocks rising tall against the parlor windows. Only in place of the cheerful pinks and reds of the nodding stalks, with their gay rosettes of bloom, was a crepe scarf holding the blinds together, and another on the sitting-room side, and another on the brass knocker of the brown-painted door.
Stop, Uncle Jerry. Don't turn in at the side. Hand me my satchel, please. Drop me in the road and let me run up the path by myself. Then drive away quickly.
At the noise and rumble of the approaching stage, the house door opened from within, just as Rebecca closed the gate behind her. Aunt Jane came down the stone steps, a changed woman, frail and broken and white. Rebecca held out her arms, and the old aunt crept into them feebly, as she did on that day when she opened the grave of her buried love and showed the dead face, just for an instant, to a child. Warmth and strength and life flowed into the aged frame from the young one.
Rebecca,
she said, raising her head.
Before you go in to look at her, do you feel any bitterness over anything she ever said to you?
Rebecca's eyes blazed reproach, almost anger, as she said chokingly,
Oh, Aunt Jane, could you believe it of me? I'm going in with a heart brimful of gratitude.
She was a good woman, Rebecca. She had a quick temper and a sharp tongue, but she wanted to do right, and she did it as near as she could. She never said so, but I'm sure she was sorry for every hard word she spoke to you. She didn't take 'em back in life, but she acted so you'd know her feeling when she was gone.
I told her before I left that she'd been the making of me, just as Mother says.
sobbed Rebecca.
She wasn't that,
said Jane.
God made you in the first place, and you've done considerable yourself to help him along, but she gave you the wherewithal to work with, and that ain't to be despised, especially when anybody gives up her own luxuries and pleasures to do it. Now let me tell you something, Rebecca. Your Aunt Mirandy's willed all this to you, the brick house, and the buildings and furniture, and the land all round the house, as far as you can see.
Rebecca threw off her hat and put her hand to her heart, as she always did in moments of intense excitement. After a moment's silence, she said,
Let me go in alone. I want to talk to her. I want to thank her. I feel as if I could make her hear and feel and understand.
Jane went back into the kitchen, to the inexorable tasks that death has no power, even for a day, to blot from existence. He can stalk through dwelling after dwelling, leaving despair and desolation behind him, but the table must be laid, the dishes washed, the beds made by somebody. 10 minutes later, Rebecca came out from the great presence, looking white and spent, but chastened and glorified. She sat in the quiet doorway, shaded from the little Riverboro world by the overhanging elms. A wide sense of thankfulness and peace possessed her as she looked at the autumn landscape, listened to the rumble of a wagon on the bridge, and heard the call of the river as it dashed to the sea. She put up her hand softly and touched first the shining brass knocker and then the red bricks glowing in the October sun. It was home, her roof, her garden, her green acres, her dear trees. It was shelter for the little family at Sunnybrook. Her mother would have once more the companionship of her sister and the friends of her girlhood. The children would have teachers and playmates. And she? Her own future was close-folded still, folded and hidden in beautiful mists. But she leaned her head against the sun-warmed door, and closing her eyes, whispered just as if she had been a child, saying her prayers.
God bless Aunt Miranda. God bless the brick house that was. God bless the brick house that is to be.
End of chapter 31. End of Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm by Kate Douglas Wiggin.